The red marker slammed against the whiteboard so hard it cracked in half. Victoria Hastings stood frozen for a heartbeat, staring at the broken pieces in her hand like they were evidence of a crime she'd just committed.
This
3
equation needs
days.
adjustment here. Your
$3
calculations for the
million
last variable
spent
are
on
off by a
consultants
factor.
who couldn't solve what 20 of the most expensive mines in Silicon Valley had failed to crack. And 72 hours from now, everything she'd built over 40 years would belong to someone else. The conference room at Nexus Technologies felt like a tomb. 20 engineers sat motionless around the table, their faces pale under the fluorescent lights. Harvard diplomas, MIT credentials, Stanford PhDs. Every single one of them had published papers, spoken at conferences, built systems that had changed industries. And not one of them could look her in the eye. Victoria's reflection stared back from the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seattle's skyline. 61 years old, CEO of a billion-dollar company, and 47 hours without sleep, running on coffee that had stopped working around dawn yesterday. Her hands shook slightly as she set the broken marker on the table. Not from caffeine, from the bone-deep certainty that she was about to lose everything. Dr. James Crawford cleared his throat. 23 years in artificial intelligence research. PhD from Caltech. Salary of $400,000 a year, not counting stock options. He typed something on his laptop and the main screen flickered to life. Numbers cascaded down in neat columns. Every single metric showed red. Failure across every parameter they'd promised the Defense Department would work. The neural network is hitting resistance in the decision tree architecture. Crawford's voice carried the careful neutrality of a man delivering a terminal diagnosis. We've recalibrated the weighted nodes 17 times, adjusted the learning parameters across 43 iterations, restructured the entire algorithmic framework from the ground up. English. James. Victoria's voice came out quieter than she intended. Dangerous quiet. Pretend I'm not paying you $400,000 a year to confuse me with jargon. Crawford's jaw tightened. He'd spent 3 days trying to save this project. 3 days of his team working around the clock, ordering takeout at midnight, sleeping under their desks. And he had nothing to show for it except bags under his eyes and the growing certainty that they were all about to be fired. It's broken. His voice cracked slightly on the words. And we don't know why. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush bone. Victoria turned slowly to face the room. 20 pairs of eyes found suddenly fascinating things to look at. The table, their laptops, the coffee stains on the whiteboard, anywhere but at the woman who'd built this company from nothing, when every venture capitalist in San Francisco told her a woman her age should be home with her grandchildren. Do you know what General Carter told me yesterday? Victoria's hands pressed flat against the table, steadying herself against the exhaustion that threatened to pull her under. He said if we don't deliver a working system by Friday at 2 p.m., the contract goes to Meridian Technologies. All $100 million of it. She let the number hang in the air. $100 million. 3 years of development. 200 employees whose jobs depended on this contract. And her own reputation built over decades of proving everyone wrong about to crumble because the system they'd promised the military couldn't tell the difference between a supply convoy and a school bus. Do you know what happens when we lose a $100 million defense contract? Victoria's voice finally cracked. We don't just lose money, we lose credibility. We lose every future contract. We lose the company. Her phone buzzed against the table. A text from her daughter Amy. The preview showed a photo. A drawing in crayon. Stick figures holding hands. Grandma and Lily, the caption read. She's been carrying this around for a week, waiting to give it to you. When are you coming to visit? It's been 3 months, Mom. Victoria shoved the phone in her pocket without opening the full message. 3 months since she'd seen her 8-year-old granddaughter. 3 months of promising next weekend, next month, as soon as this project stabilizes. And now the project was dying, and she still hadn't made time for a little girl who thought her grandmother had forgotten she existed. Everyone out. Victoria straightened CEO mask sliding back into place. Don't come back until you have something that works. I don't care if you have to rebuild it from scratch. I don't care if you have to sleep here. Figure it out. They fled. 20 brilliant minds scrambling for the door like students dismissed from detention. All except Rachel Kim, her VP of Operations, and the only person in this building who'd ever seen Victoria cry. Rachel lingered near the door, her hand on the frame. You should go home. Rachel's voice carried the gentle insistence of someone who'd been having this argument for years. See Lily. She's 8 now, Victoria. These years don't come back. Victoria didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because the truth was she didn't know how to be a grandmother. She knew how to run board meetings and close deals and fire people who weren't performing. But sitting on the floor playing tea party with stuffed animals that required a kind of presence she'd forgotten how to access, or maybe had never learned in the first place. I'll see her when I've saved her inheritance. The words came out harsher than intended. And if you work yourself to death first. Rachel didn't wait for an answer. The door clicked shut behind her, and Victoria was alone. The city glittered through the windows. 11:47 at night, and Seattle was still alive. Restaurants full of people having dinner with their families. Movie theaters where couples held hands in the dark. Living rooms where grandparents read bedtime stories to children who would remember their voices forever. An entire world of people who'd figured out how to balance work and life while Victoria stood in an empty conference room at midnight, choosing the company over everything else. Again. When did I become this person? The thought arrived unbidden. When did saving the company become more important than the people I'm supposed to be saving it for? Her reflection in the window looked like a stranger. Expensive suit hanging loose on a frame that had lost 10 pounds in the last month. Gray hair pulled back so tight it made her scalp ache. Eyes with dark circles that no amount of concealer could hide anymore. She looked like exactly what she was. A woman who'd sacrificed everything for success and was only now realizing success couldn't love her back. The phone buzzed again. Amy calling this time. Victoria stared at the screen until it went to voicemail, then listened to the message with her forehead pressed against the cold glass. Mom, you actually picked up? Voicemail. The disappointment in Amy's voice hurt worse than anger would have. Lily was waiting up for you to call, but it's almost midnight and she fell asleep on the couch. She asked me tonight why Grandma doesn't love her anymore. Victoria's chest seized. I told her that's not true. That Grandma loves her very much, that Grandma is just very busy saving the world. Amy paused. But Mom, she's 8. She doesn't understand busy. She just understands not here, the message ended. Victoria stood in the darkness of her corner office surrounded by awards and achievements and 40 years of proving everyone wrong, and she had never felt more alone in her life. Marcus Webb pushed his cleaning cart through the executive floor with the efficiency of a man who'd perfected the art of being furniture. Gray uniform, worn Nike sneakers, one earbud in his left ear playing nothing because he'd learned years ago that people left you alone if you looked occupied. The other ear stayed free to listen for footsteps. Voices any sign that someone might need him to be even more invisible than usual. 52 years old. White guy with graying hair and calloused hands that had spent 13 years holding mops instead of the research papers he'd once dreamed of publishing. Single father to an 8-year-old daughter who thought her dad was the smartest person in the world and had no idea he'd once been 2 semesters away from a PhD at MIT. The executive floor at this hour was a ghost town, just the hum of servers in the data center and the occasional security guard making rounds. Marcus had worked this shift for 3 years and could walk every hallway blindfolded. He knew which offices had personal photos on the desks, which engineers left their code visible on their monitors, which bathrooms ran out of soap by Thursday and needed early refills. He knew everything about Nexus technologies except how to stop being invisible long enough to matter. Marcus rounded the corner toward the main conference room and stopped. The lights were still on. That was unusual. Most nights by 11:30 the place was dark except for the emergency exits and the red glow of charging stations. He approached the glass walls cautiously, prepared to turn around if someone was still working late. The CEO sometimes stayed until dawn, though she usually holed up in her private office instead of the common areas. The room was empty now. But the whiteboards. Marcus forgot about his cart, forgot about staying invisible. His hand caught the door handle and he stepped inside without thinking, drawn forward by something he hadn't felt in 13 years. Recognition. The equations covering every inch of whiteboard space weren't random corporate brainstorming. They were advanced neural network architecture, decision tree mapping, algorithmic structures he'd once understood the way other people understood their native language. And in the center of the main board, circled in angry red marker, with slash marks cutting through it like a murder scene, was a problem that made his heart stop. They're using linear regression on an exponential growth model. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The weighted nodes aren't accounting for temporal decay. The feedback loop is completely ignoring real-world chaos. Marcus stepped closer. His reflection in the whiteboard showed a middle-aged janitor in a faded uniform. But his mind was moving at speeds it hadn't reached since the night Catherine had gotten her diagnosis, and the future he'd planned had shattered into pieces too small to reassemble. The solution was obvious. So obvious he couldn't believe 20 PhDs had missed it. Then again, they'd been trained to see problems as things to conquer. Marcus had been trained by life to see systems as things to understand. There was a difference. Not your problem. The voice in his head sounded like Catherine. Not your job. Clean the board and move on. His hand was shaking when he picked up the cloth, raised it toward the whiteboard, and couldn't do it. 13 years. 13 years of reading every paper he could find in the public library after his shift ended, teaching himself new frameworks on used textbooks he bought at Goodwill, solving theoretical problems in his head while mopping floors because his brain refused to let go of the work he'd loved more than anything except his wife and daughter. 13 years of watching his knowledge rust while life demanded he choose survival over growth. And here, written in red marker like a gift from a universe that owed him several, was the kind of problem he used to solve before breakfast. "What are you doing?" his brain screamed at him. "You're going to get fired. Sophie needs to eat. You have rent due in 5 days." But his hand was already moving toward the red marker lying on the table, already picking it up, already testing its weight like a weapon he'd once wielded with precision. 5 minutes. That's all it would take. Swap the regression model for a sigmoid function. Redistribute the weighted nodes across the temporal axis. Add a feedback loop that accounts for chaos theory principles, instead of trying to impose order on inherently random systems. 5 minutes to prove he wasn't irrelevant. 5 minutes to remember what it felt like to be good at something that mattered. Catherine's voice in his memory. The promise she'd made him make while holding his hand so tight it hurt. When the door opens, Nathan. No Marcus. His name was Marcus now after 13 years of being nobody. When the door opens, walk through it. Promise me. Don't let fear make you invisible. His hand was steady when he touched marker to board, steadier than it had been in years. The equations flowed out like muscle memory. Sigmoid correction here, temporal decay compensation there. A complete restructure of the feedback architecture that would let the system learn from chaos instead of breaking against it. When Marcus stepped back, the solution was so elegant it hurt. The kind of work he'd dreamed of doing when he was 25, and brilliant, and certain he was going to change the world, before the world had reminded him that brilliance meant nothing compared to being there when the people you loved were dying. He wiped his hands on his uniform. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it echoing in the empty room. The rational part of his brain was screaming to erase everything, to clean it off before anyone saw, before he lost the only job keeping a roof over Sophie's head. But the part of him that had spent 13 years buried under survival instincts couldn't bring himself to destroy this, couldn't erase proof that Marcus Webb was more than a man who cleaned toilets for people who wouldn't remember his name if asked. "What the hell are you doing?" Marcus spun around. Victoria Hastings stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes locked on the whiteboard, then on him. Her expression was unreadable. Exhaustion mixed with something sharper. Curiosity, maybe. Or calculation. The room felt smaller suddenly. Marcus became acutely aware of his gray uniform, the mop bucket still visible through the glass walls. The name tag that said maintenance in block letters instead of his actual name because someone in HR 3 years ago had decided individual janitor names didn't matter. "You're the night janitor." Victoria's voice wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact delivered with the precision of someone categorizing a problem to be solved. "Yes, ma'am." Marcus's throat felt dry. "Marcus Webb, I was just cleaning and I saw the problem and I thought, you saw a $100 million algorithm failing and decided to fix it with your mop." Victoria walked past him, not toward him, past him, like he was furniture to navigate around. Her eyes scanned the whiteboard with laser focus. Every correction he'd made, every adjustment to their failed architecture. "I'm sorry." Marcus heard the words coming out of his mouth from very far away. "I shouldn't have touched it. I'll wipe it clean right now. I can—" "Don't move." Victoria pulled out her phone, started photographing the whiteboard from multiple angles. Her fingers flew across the screen with practiced efficiency, sending the images somewhere. "To someone, ma'am, please." Marcus felt the ground shifting under his feet, felt 13 years of careful invisibility crumbling because he'd been stupid enough to believe he could matter again. "I can't lose this job. I have a daughter, she's 8 years old. She's all I have. I'm all she has." Victoria didn't look at him. She was still studying the whiteboard, still photographing. Her phone rang and she answered without taking her eyes off his corrections. "Rachel." "Conference room, now, emergency." She hung up. The silence stretched. Marcus's mind raced through scenarios. How fast he'd have to find another job. Whether Mrs. Sullivan would give him a few weeks on the rent. How he'd explain to Sophie why Daddy couldn't afford her field trip to the Science Museum next month. "What's your name again?" Victoria finally turned to face him. Marcus Webb. Where did you study?" I started at MIT, but I never finished. My wife got sick. I had to drop out to take care of her." Something shifted in Victoria's expression. Not pity. Marcus had learned to recognize pity, and this wasn't it. This was the look of someone recalculating an equation. MIT. Really? Victoria's eyes focused on him with sudden intensity. "You were at MIT studying what exactly? Machine learning and neural network architecture. But that was 13 years ago. Before life happened. Before everything changed." The door burst open. Rachel Kim rushed in, still pulling on her jacket over what looked like pajamas. Her hair was in a messy ponytail and her eyes were alert despite the hour. "Victoria, what's wrong? Did something happen with the system?" "Did Crawford tell me what you see?" Victoria pointed at the whiteboard. Rachel's eyes scanned the equations. Confusion melted into recognition. Recognition hardened into disbelief. Her hand went to her mouth. "This is a sigmoid correction with temporal decay compensation." Rachel's voice came out barely above a whisper. "If this actually works, it would solve the feedback loop problem completely. It would solve everything we've been breaking our heads over for 3 days." She turned to Marcus, really looked at him for the first time. The gray uniform, the mop bucket, the weathered hands of someone who'd spent years doing manual labor instead of intellectual work. "The janitor did this?" Rachel looked between Marcus and Victoria like she was waiting for the punchline. The janitor, Victoria confirmed. Her expression was still unreadable, but something in her posture had changed. The exhaustion was still there, but underneath it, Marcus could see the steel that had built $1 billion company from nothing. That's impossible. Rachel pulled out her tablet. This is PhD level work, senior researcher level. This is run it. Victoria's voice cut through Rachel's spiral. Right now. Run the simulation with his corrections and tell me if it works. Rachel's hands shook slightly as she input the new parameters. The tablet screen loaded, processed. Marcus held his breath. Sophie's face flashed through his mind. The way she smiled when he walked through the door at 7 a.m. sharp every morning. The way she trusted him to always be there even when he felt like he was failing at everything else. The tablet beeped. Green bars filled the screen where red ones had been moments before. Rachel stared at the numbers like they were written in a language she didn't know. Error reduction 63%. Her voice broke. Processing speed increase 41%. Victoria, it works. The silence was absolute. Marcus felt something cracking open in his chest. Something that had been locked away for 13 years because hope was too expensive when you were choosing between rent and groceries. Who are you? Victoria's voice was quiet now. Dangerous quiet. And I want the truth this time. Not the just a janitor story. The real story. Marcus looked at the whiteboard, at his corrections written in red marker, at 13 years of knowledge that had never gone away, just gone dormant, waiting for someone to ask the right question. I was going to change the world. His voice came out rough. That was the plan. Finish my PhD at MIT, join a research lab, build AI systems that could actually help people instead of just optimizing ad clicks. He paused. The memories hurt. They always hurt. Then Catherine got diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. We had a newborn daughter, no insurance, medical bills that made my student loans look like pocket change. So I made a choice. I could stay in school and let someone else hold my wife's hand while she died. Or I could drop out and be there for every single moment we had left. Rachel was crying quietly. Victoria's face had gone very still. I dropped out 2 semesters before finishing. Took care of Catherine for 18 months. Held her hand through every chemo session, every radiation treatment, every night when the pain got so bad she couldn't sleep, and all I could do was lie next to her and promise our daughter would be okay. Marcus's throat closed. He forced the words out anyway. Then I held Sophie at Catherine's funeral and promised I'd do whatever it took to give her a good life, even if it meant cleaning toilets for people who look through me like I'm invisible, even if it meant giving up everything I'd worked for, because she's worth more than any PhD, worth more than any career, worth more than pride. How old is your daughter? Victoria's voice was softer now, almost gentle. 8. Same as your granddaughter, I think. I've seen the photos on your desk when I empty your trash. Victoria went very still. Marcus hadn't meant to reveal that he paid attention to the personal details of executives' lives, that he knew from the dates on her calendar that she kept canceling trips to visit family, that sometimes late at night when he was vacuuming the hallway outside her office he could hear her crying. What's her name? Victoria asked. Sophie, after Catherine's grandmother. Does Sophie know about MIT, about who you used to be? Marcus shook his head. She knows I work nights. She knows I'm always there at 7 a.m. to make breakfast and braid her hair and walk her to the bus stop. That's enough. That has to be enough. Is it? The question hit harder than Marcus expected. Victoria sat down in one of the conference room chairs, not at the head of the table where the CEO usually commanded meetings, just a regular chair, like a regular person. Sit down, Mr. Webb. Victoria's voice carried a weight that made it not quite an order, but definitely not a suggestion. Marcus sat. The chair felt wrong, too comfortable, too much like he belonged in rooms like this instead of cleaning them. Victoria leaned forward, elbows on the table. 40 years of corporate warfare in her eyes, but underneath it something more human. Something that recognized pain because it had felt its own version. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Victoria's hands clasped together on the table. Can you do that again? Look at another problem and solve it. What kind of problem? Marcus's heart was pounding again. The kind worth $100 million. The kind that decides whether this company survives or dies. Victoria's voice cracked slightly. The kind that I can't solve alone anymore, and I'm too proud to admit that to anyone except maybe you, because you've already seen me at my worst. Marcus thought about Sophie, about the promise he'd made to Catherine, about 13 years of being invisible, and one night of finally being seen. I'd need to see the full system architecture. I'd need access to the existing codebase. I'd need done. Victoria didn't hesitate. You'll have whatever you need. I don't have security clearance. I don't have credentials. I don't have... You have results, Mr. Webb. Victoria's eyes held his. And right now, results matter more than anything else. Marcus felt the weight of the decision pressing down. Felt the fear that had kept him small for 13 years, screaming that this was too big, too risky, too likely to end in failure that would prove everyone right about him being a washed-up dropout. I need to be home by 7 a.m. The words came out firm. Every morning. No exceptions. Sophie needs me to be there. That's non-negotiable. Victoria nodded slowly. Then we work around your schedule, whatever it takes. And if I can't actually solve it, if tonight was just luck, if I'm not as good as I used to be, then you'll have tried. Victoria's voice was steady, which is more than most people do. Which is more than I can say I've done for the things that actually matter. She stood up, extended her hand across the table. Marcus looked at it, at the perfectly manicured nails and expensive watch and everything it represented. A door opening. A chance to prove he wasn't just a man who cleaned floors. A risk that could destroy the fragile stability he'd built for Sophie, or could finally give them both something better. He shook her hand. Her grip was firm, confident. The handshake of someone who'd learned to project certainty even when terrified. One condition. Marcus's voice was steady now. Nobody knows I'm the janitor. Not until we see if this actually works. I can't let Sophie find out her dad is trying to be a scientist again and then watch me fail. I can't put her through hoping for something better and then having it taken away. Victoria's grip tightened. Deal. She released his hand and adjusted her jacket. Became the CEO again. The vulnerable woman who'd admitted she couldn't solve problems alone disappeared behind the armor of professional competence. But Mr. Webb Victoria paused at the doorway. Her reflection in the glass walls looked smaller somehow. More human. Yes, stop calling yourself just anything. You just gave this company a chance to survive. That makes you anything but just. She walked out. Rachel followed after giving Marcus a look he couldn't quite read. Something between respect and curiosity and maybe a little bit of hope. Marcus stood alone in the conference room. His reflection in the whiteboard showed a 52-year-old janitor in a gray uniform, but his hands were steady. His mind was moving faster than it had in 13 years. And somewhere deep in his chest, beneath the fear and the doubt and the weight of knowing Sophie's entire future was riding on decisions he made tonight, was something that felt dangerously like hope. His phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Sullivan, the 72-year-old widow who lived next door and sometimes watched Sophie when emergencies arose. Everything okay? Thought I heard you leave again. Need me to check on the little one, Marcus typed back quickly. Everything's fine. Might be a long night at work. Can you be on standby in case? The response came immediately. Of course. She's lucky to have you. Whatever it is, I hope it's good news. Marcus pocketed his phone and looked at the whiteboard one more time. At the corrections he'd made. At the proof that 13 years hadn't erased who he was, just forced him to become someone else for a while. Sleep is a luxury I gave up a long time ago. The thought arrived with Catherine's voice in his memory. The echo of a promise made in a hospital room while holding hands with a woman who believed in him even when he'd stopped believing in himself. Marcus picked up his phone again. Called Mrs. Sullivan even though it was almost midnight. "Margaret, I need a favor. A big one." Margaret Sullivan answered on the second ring, despite the hour her voice immediately alert with the sharpness of someone who'd raised 4 children and buried a husband and learned that late-night calls rarely brought good news. "Marcus, is everything okay? Is Sophie?" "She's fine. She's sleeping." Marcus gripped the phone tighter than necessary. "But I need to stay at work tonight. Something came up. Something important." The pause lasted 3 heartbeats. In those 3 years living next door, Marcus had never once asked Margaret to watch Sophie overnight. He was always home by 7 a.m. Always. The kind of reliability that made Margaret tell her book club he was the best father she'd ever seen, even if he did look exhausted every single day. "This is about more than cleaning floors, isn't it?" Margaret's voice softened with understanding Marcus didn't deserve. "Maybe. I don't know yet." His reflection in the conference room glass looked like a stranger, someone who might matter again. Someone who might fail spectacularly and take his daughter's stability down with him. "Go. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Sophie won't even know you're gone. Margaret." The line went quiet except for the sound of her moving around. Then her voice came back firm as bedrock. "I raised 4 children and buried a husband who worked himself to death trying to provide for us. I know what sacrifice looks like, Marcus. And I know what it looks like when someone gets a chance that doesn't come twice. Whatever this is, don't let it pass you by because you're scared. Some doors only open once." Marcus ended the call and stood motionless in the empty conference room. Through the glass walls, he could see Victoria speaking quietly with Rachel near the elevators. Both women looked at him periodically, like he was a puzzle they were trying to solve, or a bomb they were deciding whether to defuse. His phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "I'm walking over now. Left a note on Sophie's nightstand in case she wakes up. It says, 'Daddy is helping someone important tonight. He loves you to Mars and back. See you at breakfast. She'll be fine. Now go do whatever you need to do.'" Marcus typed with shaking fingers. "Thank you. I don't know how to—" The response came before he could finish. "You'd do the same for anyone. That's who you are. Now stop texting me and go be brilliant." Victoria appeared in the doorway. She carried 2 cups of coffee in paper cups that looked expensive, even empty. Set one in front of Marcus without ceremony. "It's terrible." Her voice carried the dry humor of someone too exhausted for pretense. "But it's caffeine. The executive machine costs more per cup than most people spend on lunch, and it still tastes like regret." Marcus almost smiled. "I've had worse. I doubt that." Victoria sat across from him. The CEO armor had cracked slightly. Exhaustion showed through the gaps. "This coffee is a metaphor for everything wrong with this company. Expensive, overpromised, fundamentally disappointing." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Just 2 people sitting in a conference room at 1 a.m. drinking terrible coffee and trying to figure out how they'd ended up here. 2 strangers from opposite ends of every spectrum that mattered, connected by desperation, and the slim chance that desperation might be enough. "Tell me about the system." Marcus set down his cup. "Everything from the beginning." Victoria pulled up the main architecture on the central screen. Lines of code filled the display. Neural network diagrams, decision tree mappings, the kind of complex AI framework that defense contractors paid fortunes to develop and militaries paid even larger fortunes to deploy. "We promised the Department of Defense an AI that could optimize military logistics in real time." Victoria's voice took on the clipped efficiency of someone delivering a briefing. "Troop movements, supply chains, resource allocation, all coordinated by a single neural network that learns and adapts faster than any human team could manage. And it's failing. Marcus could see the problem already. The architecture was brilliant but fundamentally flawed, like a bridge designed by engineers who'd never seen a river flood. Error rates climbing. The system can't adapt to unexpected variables. Every time we think we've fixed one problem, three more appear. Victoria's hands clenched around her coffee cup. We have until Friday at 2 p.m., 72 hours from now. If we can't demonstrate a working system to General Carter, the contract goes to Meridian and this company goes under. Marcus studied the screen. His mind was already racing through possibilities, making connections, seeing patterns. The caffeine hit his bloodstream and suddenly he felt more awake than he had in years. "Show me the decision tree." Victoria pulled it up. Marcus leaned forward. The problem was right there. Obvious once you knew where to look. But you had to know where to look, and these engineers had been trained to see problems one way, while life had taught Marcus to see them differently. "There," he pointed, "and there. Your engineers built this like a chess program. Every move calculated 17 steps ahead. Perfect logic, perfect precision. That's what we hired them for." Victoria's eyebrow rose slightly. "That's what $400,000 salaries buy you. That's why it's failing." Marcus grabbed a marker from the table, stood up and moved to the whiteboard. His hand was steady now, steadier than it had been in 13 years. War isn't chess. Life isn't chess. You can't calculate 17 moves ahead when the board keeps changing, when pieces appear and disappear without warning, when the rules themselves shift mid-game. So what do you suggest? Victoria watched him with the intensity of someone who'd built her career on reading people and knowing when to bet on them. Marcus started writing. The marker moved across the whiteboard with a certainty that surprised him. Muscle memory kicking in. Years of knowledge that had never actually gone away, just been buried under the need to survive. "My wife was a social worker." His voice came out rougher than intended. "She spent her entire career helping people in crisis. Families falling apart, kids in danger, situations where there was no playbook, no protocol, no right answer." Victoria didn't interrupt, just watched him work. I asked her once how she made decisions when everything was chaos. You know what she said? What Marcus stepped back from the whiteboard. He'd drawn a new architecture, organic, adaptive, nothing like the rigid structure on the screens. She said you don't try to control chaos. You learn to dance with it. You build systems that are flexible, not rigid. You create frameworks that can bend without breaking. Victoria stared at the whiteboard. Her expression was unreadable, but Marcus had learned to read people too in his own way. Learned it from years of being invisible and watching how people moved when they thought no one was paying attention. That's a completely different approach. Victoria's voice was careful, measured. This would require rebuilding the core architecture from scratch. "Yes, we have 72 hours. Then we'd better get started." Marcus set down the marker, looked at Victoria with something that might have been confidence, or might have been the desperate bluff of a man with nothing left to lose. Victoria stood, walked to the whiteboard, studied his work with the focus of someone who'd spent 40 years evaluating risks and making bets that could destroy or save everything. "Why are you helping me?" Her voice was quiet now. "You don't owe me anything. You don't owe this company anything. If anything, companies like mine are the reason people like you get overlooked in the first place." Marcus thought about Sophie, about Catherine's hospital bed and the promise he'd made while holding her hand, about 13 years of being invisible, and one night of someone finally asking him to be seen. When Catherine was dying, she made me promise something. He could still feel her grip, weak but determined. She knew I'd have to give up MIT. She knew I'd spend years just surviving. But she made me promise that when the chance really came, I wouldn't let fear stop me from taking it. His voice cracked slightly. She grabbed my hand and said, "Marcus, you're going to want to hide. You're going to tell yourself you're not good enough anymore, that too much time has passed, that the world moved on without you." And she made me promise I wouldn't believe that. Promise me that when the door opens, you'll walk through it. Victoria's eyes were bright, not crying, but close. I've been waiting 13 years for a door to open, Marcus continued. Tonight it did, and I made a promise to a woman who deserved better than watching her husband become invisible for the rest of his life. The silence stretched. Marcus could hear the hum of the building's ventilation system, the distant sound of a security guard making rounds, his own heartbeat. My husband died 15 years ago. Victoria's voice was steady, but something underneath it was breaking. Heart attack at his desk, working late for me, for this company. I found him the next morning. His coffee was still warm. Marcus stayed quiet. Some confessions required witness, not response. Everyone told me to slow down after that, to delegate, to take care of myself. But I couldn't, because if I slowed down, I'd have to feel it. I'd have to face what I'd done, what this company cost us. She turned back to the whiteboard. So I worked harder, built more, proved everyone wrong who said I couldn't do it alone. Victoria's voice dropped to barely above whisper. And in the process, I became exactly what I was afraid of. Someone who sacrifices everyone she loves for something that can't love her back. It's not too late. The words came out before Marcus could stop them. Isn't it? Victoria's laugh was bitter. My granddaughter barely knows me. My daughter thinks I love this company more than I love her. And maybe she's right. Maybe I do. Because at least the company needs me. At least here I matter. You matter to them too. Marcus spoke with the certainty of someone who'd spent years being the only parent his daughter had. They just need you to show up. When's the last time you showed up? Victoria turned the question back on him like a knife. Really showed up as the man you used to be instead of the ghost you've become. The words hit like a physical blow. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, had no answer, because she was right. I thought so. Victoria's expression softened slightly, not unkindly. We're both hiding, Marcus. You hide by becoming invisible. I hide by becoming untouchable. But hiding is still hiding. She moved toward the door. I'm going to get the rest of the team, Rachel and Maya and Helen, the people I actually trust. We're going to need help to rebuild this architecture in time. Won't they ask questions? Marcus felt the fear creeping back. About me? They'll ask plenty of questions, but they'll follow my lead. Victoria paused at the threshold. The question is, are you ready to stop being invisible? Marcus thought about Sophie. About 13 years of being furniture in rooms full of people who never looked twice. About what it would mean to matter again and what it would cost if he failed. I don't know if I remember how. The admission felt like defeat. Then I guess we'll both be learning something tonight. Victoria left without waiting for a response. Marcus stood alone with the whiteboard. His own handwriting stared back at him like evidence of a crime, or like proof that he'd once been someone worth remembering. He wasn't sure which scared him more. His phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. Sophie woke up asking for you. I told her you're helping someone important. She said, Daddy always helps people. That's what he does. Then she went back to sleep, hugging that stuffed elephant. You raised a good one, Marcus. He typed back with shaking fingers. Tell her I love her. Tell her I'm trying to make her proud. The response came immediately. She's already proud. She just doesn't know how much she should be yet. Marcus pocketed his phone as footsteps approached. Multiple footsteps. Victoria's team. The door opened and Rachel entered first, followed by a young woman with purple-streaked hair who looked barely 30, and an older woman with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. They all stopped when they saw Marcus. Really saw him. The gray uniform. The name tag that said, Maintenance. The weathered hands and tired eyes of someone who'd spent years doing work that left marks. Everyone, this is Marcus Webb. Victoria's voice carried the authority of someone who'd learned when to explain and when to simply command. He's the reason we're not writing resignation letters tomorrow. The young woman with purple hair looked Marcus up and down. "You're the one who fixed the neural network. I suggested some adjustments." Marcus heard how inadequate that sounded the moment it left his mouth. "Suggested some adjustments." Purple hair woman turned to Victoria. "I ran his corrections through 16 different simulations. They work every single time. I've been studying AI for 8 years and I've never seen anyone solve a temporal decay problem that fast." The older woman stepped forward, extended her hand with the confidence of someone who'd earned the right to judgment calls. "Helen Chen, senior architect, 30 years in this industry." She shook Marcus's hand firmly. Her grip was strong, practical. "I don't care where you went to school or what you've been doing for the past decade. I care about results. And based on what I'm seeing on that whiteboard, you've got results." "Thank you." Marcus felt something loosening in his chest. Acceptance, maybe. Or just the relief of not being immediately dismissed. "Don't thank me yet." Helen's eyes twinkled slightly. "You're about to work harder than you've ever worked in your life. Victoria says you need to be home by 7 a.m. That gives us 6 hours to rebuild a system 20 engineers couldn't fix in 3 days. Is that possible?" Marcus looked at the screens. The massive code base, the complexity. Only one way to find out. Helen pulled out her laptop and claimed a seat at the conference table like she owned it. Victoria clapped her hands once. Sharp, commanding attention. "Listen up. We're throwing out the old architecture, starting from scratch. Marcus's approach is different, but it's our best shot. Rachel, you're on coordination. Maya, you handle integration testing. Helen, you work with Marcus on core framework. I'll manage resources and keep Crawford from interfering." "What about Crawford and his team?" Rachel's voice carried careful neutrality. "They've been working on this for 3 days. Crawford's team failed. This is the new team." Victoria's voice was steel. "Anyone who has a problem taking direction from a fresh perspective can leave now." Nobody moved. "Good. Then let's get to work. We have until Friday at 2 p.m. That's 68 hours from now. Clock's ticking." The next 6 hours blurred together in a way Marcus had forgotten was possible. His hands flew across keyboards that felt foreign and familiar at the same time. Muscle memory returning. Brain patterns reactivating. Like a language he'd once spoken fluently and thought he'd forgotten but turned out to be just sleeping. Maya challenged him at 2:45 a.m. "If we restructure the weighted nodes this way, won't we lose predictive accuracy in stable scenarios?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Yes, by about 8%. But we gain 400% adaptability in chaos scenarios. War isn't stable. We're optimizing for reality, not theory." Maya grinned. Her energy at this hour should have been impossible, but she radiated the kind of enthusiasm Marcus remembered from his own MIT days. "I like how you think." Helen solved an integration problem at 4:20 that Marcus had been stuck on for 40 minutes. She walked him through a neural architecture search framework that hadn't existed when he'd been in school. Showed him what was possible with modern tools. "This is incredible." Marcus absorbed the information like he'd been starving for it, which he had been. 13 years of intellectual drought. With this, we could... They spent 45 minutes exploring possibilities. Equals, colleagues, not janitor and executive. Just 2 people who understood systems and loved the puzzle of making them work better. Rachel brought breakfast sandwiches at 5:30. None of them had noticed the sun starting to rise over Seattle's skyline. She set down coffee, better coffee than the executive machine produced, and food that actually smelled appealing. "You all look like you haven't slept in days." Rachel's voice carried maternal concern. "Eat something before you collapse." "Can't collapse yet." Maya was typing furiously. "We're so close. The integration is almost..." The screen flashed green. Every module connecting. Every test passing. Maya let out a whoop that probably woke people on lower floors. "It works." She spun her chair around to face the room. "The core framework actually works." Victoria walked over from where she'd been making phone calls and managing some crisis with the board, looked at the screen. Her face showed nothing, but Marcus could see her hands shaking slightly as she gripped the back of Maya's chair. Run the full stress test. Victoria's voice was steady. All scenarios. Military operations, supply chain disruptions, multivariable chaos. Everything. Maya's fingers flew. The system processed, calculated, adapted. Green metrics filled every screen. Performance numbers that made Rachel whistle low under her breath. Error reduction 68%. Maya's voice cracked. That's better than this morning's test. Processing speed increase 47%. Adaptation to unexpected variables increase 320%. Helen leaned back in her chair. Well, I'll be damned. It actually works. Marcus stared at the screens, at proof that he hadn't lost it, that 13 years of survival hadn't erased the person he'd been, that maybe, just maybe, he could give Sophie something better than a father who came home exhausted every morning, smelling like cleaning chemicals. His phone alarm went off. 6:45. 15 minutes to get home before Sophie woke up. Before his carefully constructed routine shattered, and she found out her father had spent the night doing something that might fail spectacularly and break both their hearts. I have to go. Marcus stood up fast enough to make his chair roll backward. Maya's head snapped around. The system isn't finished. We still need to optimize the my daughter's waking up. I promised I'd be there. Marcus grabbed his jacket from where he'd draped it over a chair hours ago. Felt everyone's eyes on him. Victoria stood. Go. We'll continue without you. But Victoria, I've spent 40 years choosing work over the people who matter. Victoria's voice was firm, but underneath it was something softer, something that understood. Don't make my mistakes. Go home. Be with Sophie. Come back tonight. Marcus hesitated at the door, part of him screaming that leaving now was abandoning them, that he needed to stay and finish what he'd started. But the larger part, the part that had kept him going through 13 years of exhaustion, knew Sophie needed him more than this system did. Thank you. His throat was tight. For seeing me. For giving me a chance. Victoria smiled. First genuine smile he'd seen from her. Thank you for reminding me what chances are for. Marcus ran for the elevator. He had 15 minutes to get across town, change out of clothes that smelled like coffee and electronic equipment, and become dad again. The transition felt impossible, but he'd been doing impossible things for 13 years. This was just one more. The cab driver looked at him funny when Marcus gave an address and said he'd pay double to get there in 12 minutes. Looked at him harder when Marcus pulled out cash instead of a credit card. But money talked, and the driver made it happen. Marcus burst through his apartment door at 6:57, stripped off his shirt while running to the bathroom, shoved everything under the sink where Sophie wouldn't find it, splashed water on his face, pulled on jeans and a t-shirt. His hands were still shaking from caffeine and adrenaline and the surreal understanding that he'd just spent 6 hours doing work he'd loved more than anything except his family. Daddy Sophie stood in the hallway, clutching the stuffed elephant Catherine had given her 3 days before dying. Her hair was a wild mess of sleep-tangled curls, brown eyes so much like her mother's it hurt to look at them sometimes. Marcus's heart cracked open the way it did every morning. Hey, Butterfly. You look tired. Sophie's voice carried concern beyond her years. I'm okay. Just a long night. Marcus knelt down so they were eye level. How'd you sleep? Good. Mrs. Sullivan said you were helping someone important. She padded toward him on bare feet. Was it the sad princess? Marcus's brain stuttered. What sad princess? The one from your stories, the one who forgot how to smile because she built her castle too high. Sophie studied his face with uncomfortable perceptiveness. Did you help her remember Yeah, Butterfly? Something like that. Marcus pulled her close, breathing in strawberry shampoo and the innocence of a child who still believed her father could fix anything. You'll do it. Sophie spoke with absolute certainty. You always help people. That's your superpower. I don't have superpowers, Sophie. Marcus's voice came out rougher than intended. Yes, you do. Your superpower is you never give up. Even when things are hard. Even when you're tired. You just keep going. Marcus held her tighter. Couldn't speak. Because his 8-year-old daughter had just described him better than he'd ever been able to describe himself. Daddy? Yeah, I'm hungry. Sophie pulled back with the practical concern of a child whose stomach operated on a schedule. Marcus laughed. Real laugh. First one in longer than he could remember. Then let's make pancakes. They made pancakes together in the tiny kitchen that barely fit 2 people. Sophie stood on her step stool carefully measuring flour while Marcus worked the griddle. She talked about her upcoming science project, about how Molly's dad had said something mean about people who clean toilets at yesterday's school pickup, about how Mrs. Peterson was writing a book and wanted to interview parents who work hard. Marcus listened. He always listened. But today, something else churned beneath the surface. A question he'd been avoiding for years because he was terrified of the answer. Sophie, can I ask you something? Sure. She flipped a pancake with careful concentration. If I had a chance to do something different, something bigger, but it might change things, would you be okay with that? Sophie set down the spatula, looked at him with an expression too old for her face. What kind of different? I don't know yet. Maybe a different job, maybe working different hours for a while. Would you be okay if I wasn't always home right at 7? Would you still be home in the mornings? Sophie's voice was small, vulnerable in a way that made Marcus want to promise impossible things. I'd try. I'd always try. Marcus crouched down beside the stove, met her eyes. But I need you to know something. Whatever changes, I love you more than anything, more than any job, more than anything. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke with the kind of wisdom that comes from watching adults try to hide their struggles. Daddy Molly said her dad makes lots of money and that's why he's important. But Mrs. Peterson said that's not how you measure people. She said you measure people by how they make others feel. Mrs. Peterson is very smart. Marcus's vision blurred slightly. I know. So if this different thing makes you feel good, then you should do it. Because when you feel good, I feel good. That's how it works. When did you get so wise? Marcus pulled her into a hug that lifted her off the step stool. I've been practicing. Sophie giggled. Her breath smelled like maple syrup and childhood. They finished making pancakes, ate them together while Sophie chattered about her upcoming field trip to the Science Museum and how she hoped they'd see the dinosaur bones because dinosaurs were the coolest thing ever, except maybe space. Marcus walked her to the bus stop at 8:15, watched her climb aboard with her too heavy backpack and her lunchbox covered in stickers, waved until the bus disappeared around the corner, then stood alone on the sidewalk feeling the weight of everything pressing down. His phone buzzed. Victoria. General Carter moved up the demonstration. Thursday morning at 10 a.m. instead of Friday afternoon. Can you come in early tonight? We have 28 hours instead of 60. Marcus's stomach dropped. 28 hours. Barely more than a day. His fingers felt numb typing the response. I'll be there. The day crawled by in a surreal haze. Marcus tried to sleep, but his brain wouldn't shut off. Kept running through algorithms, seeing problems, finding solutions. He'd spent 13 years teaching his mind to be quiet, and now it refused to cooperate. At 2 p.m., he gave up on sleep, called Margaret to check if she could watch Sophie again tonight. Made it through the conversation without revealing how much was riding on the next 24 hours. How everything. Sophie's stability, their future, his last chance to prove he wasn't a washed-up failure, depended on a system working that had destroyed 20 PhDs. He arrived at Nexus Technologies at 8 p.m. Early. Couldn't stay away. The executive floor was buzzing with activity. Maya hunched over her laptop with headphones on. Helen in deep conversation with Rachel over a tablet showing code architecture. Victoria pacing near the windows like a caged predator. You're early. Victoria's voice held surprise. Couldn't sleep. Marcus set down his backpack. How bad is it? We're close. Maya pulled off her headphones. The integration works, but we need to optimize response times. The system is adapting, but not fast enough for real-time military applications. Show me. Marcus moved to her workstation, fell into the rhythm like he'd never left, like 13 years was nothing, like he belonged here. They worked through the night. Marcus's hands flew across keyboards. His voice grew stronger as he explained concepts to Maya and Helen, teaching them the frameworks he'd developed in his own mind during years of theoretical work with no equipment except his imagination. At 10:30, Helen taught him a new optimization technique. At 12:45, Maya showed him an integration pattern he'd never seen. They built on each other, learned from each other, the kind of collaboration Marcus had dreamed about in graduate school and thought he'd never experience. At 2:30 a.m., the integration test failed catastrophically. Error cascades across the entire system. Maya looked close to tears. Helen swore under her breath. Rachel stopped mid-phone call to stare at the red screens. Marcus stayed calm. The way he'd learned to stay calm when Catherine was screaming in pain at 3 a.m. and Sophie was crying because she was 6 months old and didn't understand why Mommy hurt. The way he'd learned to stay calm when choosing between buying groceries or paying the electric bill. The way survival had taught him. Helen, pull up the node distribution matrix. His voice was steady. She did. Marcus stared at it for 90 seconds, then pointed. There. Subsection 47. We're overweighting temporal data in chaos scenarios. The system's trying too hard to learn from randomness. He walked them through the fix. 12 minutes of recalibration. Helen and Maya working together while Marcus watched and corrected and guided. The test ran again. Green across every metric. Rachel actually cheered. Maya hugged Helen. Victoria stopped pacing long enough to close her eyes and take a breath that looked like it hurt. Marcus felt nothing for a moment, then everything all at once. Relief and terror, and the crushing awareness that this was real, that he might actually pull this off, that he might actually matter again. His phone buzzed. 3:15 a.m. A text from an unknown number. This is Crawford. I reviewed security footage from Tuesday night. I know what you are. I know what you've been doing. I've already contacted Thomas Blake. There's an emergency board meeting Thursday morning at 9 a.m. You and Victoria are both done. The world tilted sideways. Marcus read the message 3 times. Each time, the words stayed the same. Victoria appeared beside him. Her phone buzzed at the same moment. She read her screen. Her face went completely expressionless, the kind of blank that comes from years of controlling reactions. Crawford knows. Her voice was flat. He's going to the board, when Marcus already knew the answer but needed to hear it. 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. 1 hour before we're supposed to demonstrate the system to General Carter. Victoria pocketed her phone. Blake will push for termination, both of us. He's been waiting for an excuse to take this company. The room had gone quiet. Maya and Helen and Rachel all staring, all understanding what this meant. I'm sorry. Marcus felt sick. This is my fault. I shouldn't have touched that whiteboard. I should have stayed invisible. Don't! Victoria's voice cut like a blade. Don't you dare apologize for being brilliant. Don't you dare apologize for saving this company. I didn't save it. I made it worse. Marcus gestured at his phone, at proof that trying to matter again had destroyed everything. You made it real. Victoria met his eyes. For the first time in 20 years, this company did something courageous, something that mattered more than protocols and credentials and playing it safe. Whatever happens tomorrow, that means something. What do we do? Rachel's voice was small. We finished the system. Victoria straightened, became the CEO again. We prepare for the demonstration. And at 9 a.m. tomorrow, we walk into that boardroom and show them what we've built. And if the board doesn't listen, Maya looked scared. Young and scared, and like she was just realizing the adults didn't actually have everything under control. Then we go down swinging. Victoria's eyes found Marcus's. Together. Marcus thought about Sophie, about Catherine's promise, about 13 years of being invisible and one night of finally being seen, about how stupid he'd been to think he could have this, to think he deserved a second chance. Together. The word came out steadier than he felt. Marcus stood outside the boardroom doors at 8:45 Thursday morning, heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his teeth. The borrowed shirt and tie from the executive shop felt like a costume, like he was a child playing dress-up in his father's closet pretending to be someone important enough to belong in rooms where decisions got made. Victoria stood beside him, perfectly composed on the surface, CEO armor locked in place. But Marcus had learned to read the micro-expressions that leaked through, the way her jaw tightened, how her left hand opened and closed against her thigh. She was terrified, just better at hiding it. Ready? Her voice carried no tremor. No. Marcus forced himself to meet her eyes. Are you not even a little? Victoria's mouth quirked, something between a smile and a grimace. But we're doing it anyway. Marcus thought about Sophie at school right now. Second period. Math, probably. She loved math, said numbers made sense in ways people didn't. What would she think when she found out her father had tried to be a scientist again? When she watched him fail in front of the people who mattered? Whatever happens in there, you changed something. Victoria's voice dropped lower. You proved you were never invisible. You were just waiting to be seen. That doesn't pay rent. The words came out harsher than Marcus intended. Doesn't feed Sophie when I'm unemployed and blacklisted. Victoria touched his arm, just briefly. Then we'd better make sure you're not unemployed. She pushed the doors open. 12 faces turned to stare. Board members arranged around the massive mahogany table like judges at a trial. Thomas Blake sat at the head, already claiming territory that wasn't his. Mid-50s silver hair, expensive suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in 6 months as a janitor. The kind of man who'd spent his life accumulating power and knew exactly how to wield it. Dr. Crawford occupied the seat to Blake's right. Satisfaction radiated from him like heat. 23 years of credentials and published papers and professional respect, all threatened by a janitor who'd solved problems Crawford couldn't. The ego wound must have festered all night. And at the far end of the table, arrival unannounced and completely unexpected, sat General William Carter in full dress uniform. 60 years old, ramrod posture, eyes that had seen combat and death and knew how to calculate the cost of failure in human lives instead of dollars. Marcus's feet stopped moving. General Carter wasn't supposed to be here. The demonstration was scheduled for 10 a.m. It was only 8:45. Someone had changed the timeline again. Someone wanted this to be an ambush. General Carter. Victoria recovered, first voice steady despite the surprise. We weren't expecting you until I moved my schedule. Carter's voice cut through the room like a blade through tissue. Mr. Blake was kind enough to inform me there might be irregularities with this project. I wanted to see for myself. Thomas Blake stood, spread his hands in a gesture of false humility that made Marcus's stomach turn. General, I apologize that you had to learn about this situation in such an unfortunate manner. If I'd known earlier about Ms. Hastings' lapse in judgment. What lapse would that be? Mr. Blake Carter's expression remained neutral, but something dangerous flickered beneath. Blake picked up a folder from the table, opened it with theatrical precision. Victoria hired an unqualified individual to work on your contract. A man with no security clearance, no credentials, no background in artificial intelligence research. I see. Carter's gaze shifted to Marcus. Predator assessing prey. And who is this unqualified individual? Marcus stepped forward before Victoria could speak, before he could talk himself out of it. That would be me, sir. Marcus Webb. And what are your qualifications, Mr. Webb? The question came wrapped in professional courtesy, but underneath was steel. I was 2 semesters away from a PhD at MIT before I dropped out 13 years ago. Marcus heard his voice from very far away. Since then, I've been working as a night janitor at this company. The room went silent. One of the board members actually gasped. Another exchanged glances with her neighbor. Crawford's smile widened. A janitor. Carter's tone gave nothing away. You're telling me a janitor has been working on a classified defense contract? Yes, sir. Marcus forced himself to stand straighter, to not shrink, to remember that Catherine had made him promise he wouldn't make himself small. Blake jumped in, voice dripping false concern. You see, General, this is exactly what I was warning you about. Victoria's judgment has been compromised. She's been making emotional decisions instead of... I didn't ask you, Mr. Blake. Carter didn't even look at him. His attention stayed locked on Marcus. Mr. Webb, I want you to explain to me in plain English what you did to this system. Marcus's throat went dry. Every instinct screamed at him to defer, to let someone more qualified speak, to become invisible again because being seen meant being vulnerable to judgment. But then he thought about Sophie asking if the sad princess learned to smile again. About 13 years of survival and one chance to prove it hadn't destroyed who he was. Sir, your engineers built a perfect system. Every protocol followed, every parameter optimized, every calculation exact. Marcus heard his voice growing stronger. And that's a problem. Carter leaned forward slightly. Explain. It's a problem because war isn't perfect. Life isn't perfect. Your system was designed to predict the future based on past patterns, but the future doesn't follow patterns. It breaks them. Blake scoffed. General, this is exactly the kind of unscientific Mr. Blake. Carter's voice dropped to a tone that could freeze blood. One more interruption and you'll wait outside. Blake's face reddened. He sat down hard. Marcus continued, gaining momentum. I redesigned the core architecture to adapt instead of predict, to learn from chaos instead of trying to control it, to think like a field commander instead of a computer. Those are nice words, Mr. Webb. Carter's expression remained unreadable. Can you prove them? Yes, sir. Marcus looked at Victoria. She nodded once. Maya was already setting up the presentation screen with her laptop. General, if you'll allow us to demonstrate. Not you, Ms. Hastings. Carter held up one hand. Him. I want to see what the janitor can do. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Blake's smile turned predatory. Crawford looked vindicated. The board members leaned forward with the hungry attention of people watching a public execution. Marcus walked to the presentation screen, hands trembling, voice steady. Maya pull up the Kandahar simulation. Maya's fingers flew across her keyboard. A scenario appeared on screen. Maps, troop positions, supply routes marked in red and green. This is a real-world logistics failure from 2023. Marcus forced himself to speak with confidence he didn't feel. Multiple supply lines compromised, enemy movement in civilian areas, equipment failures cascading across 3 separate units. The original mission took 3 weeks and cost 11 soldiers their lives. General Carter's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He knew this mission, had probably signed the casualty reports, maybe attended some of those funerals. Run it through your old system. Marcus nodded to Maya. She input the parameters. The screen calculated for 8 seconds, then displayed an error message in stark red letters. No viable route found within acceptable risk parameters. That's what your original AI produced. Marcus kept his voice level. A system that couldn't find solutions because it was optimized for perfection instead of reality. Now watch this. He input the same scenario into their rebuilt system, the one he and Maya and Helen had spent 3 nights creating, the one that represented every ounce of knowledge he'd preserved through 13 years of survival. 3 seconds later, 3 alternative routes appeared, ranked by risk time and resource efficiency. Route Alpha avoids the main conflict zone entirely by rerouting through the northern corridor. Marcus pointed to the screen. Estimated delivery time 14 hours. Casualty risk minimal. The northern corridor was mined. Carter's voice was flat. A statement of fact, not a question. The system accounts for that. Look here. Marcus pulled up the detailed analysis. It detected anomalies in the terrain data, flagged potential IED placement, suggested reconnaissance drone sweep before convoy movement. Nobody in the original mission thought of that. Carter stood slowly, walked toward the screen with the measured pace of someone whose decisions determined whether soldiers came home alive. Nobody in the original mission could process that much data fast enough. Marcus met the general's eyes. The system did it in 3 seconds. The room was absolutely silent. Board members staring at the screen. Blake's expression shifting from triumph to uncertainty. Crawford looking like he'd been punched in the stomach. Run another scenario. Carter's voice was quiet. Dangerous quiet. Something your team hasn't prepared for. Blake tried one more time. General, surely that's not necessary. The point has been made about protocol violations. The point, Mr. Blake, is whether this system can save American lives. Carter's words could have cut steel. I don't care who built it. I care if it works. He turned back to Marcus. Hurricane evacuation. Gulf Coast. 3 military bases. 12,000 personnel. Limited air transport. Deteriorating weather window. You have 30 seconds to input the scenario. Marcus's fingers flew across the keyboard. No time to think, no time to doubt. Just muscle memory and instinct and the desperation of a man who had everything riding on the next 90 seconds. The system processed, calculated, displayed results. Primary evacuation route uses naval vessels from Pensacola, Marcus explained rapidly. Secondary route coordinates helicopter transport in rotation to minimize weather exposure. Tertiary route establishes temporary shelters at inland facilities if transport becomes impossible. Time frame. Carter's voice was sharp. All 12,000 personnel evacuated within 18 hours. Marcus pulled up the detailed logistics. The system accounts for real-time weather data equipment, availability, personnel, readiness across all 3 bases. Standard military protocol takes 36 hours for that evacuation. Carter's eyebrows rose fractionally, the first break in his professional mask. Standard protocol doesn't account for real-time weather adaptation. Marcus felt something clicking into place. A certainty that had nothing to do with confidence and everything to do with knowing he was right. This system does. General Carter turned to face the board. His expression revealed nothing. Blake started to stand, started to speak. Carter's glance stopped him. Mr. Blake, you called me here to report irregularities with this project. Carter's voice carried the authority of 4 decades commanding soldiers, the weight of sending people to die and living with those decisions. Yes, General. The protocol violations alone I've commanded soldiers for 40 years. Carter spoke slowly, each word precisely placed. You know what kills soldiers, Mr. Blake? It's not protocol violations. It's rigid thinking. It's systems that can't adapt. It's leaders who care more about rules than results. Blake's face went pale. General, I was only trying to protect, you were trying to protect your position. Carter's voice never rose. Didn't need to. There's a difference. He walked toward Marcus, stopped directly in front of him, close enough that Marcus could see the ribbons on his uniform, the years of service, the weight of responsibility. Mr. Webb, why did you drop out of MIT? The question came quiet, almost gentle. My wife was diagnosed with cancer, sir. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. Stage 4. We had a newborn daughter. No insurance. Mountains of medical debt. Did she survive? Carter's eyes searched Marcus's face. No, sir. She died when Sophie was 18 months old. So you've been raising your daughter alone ever since? Not a question. Carter had clearly read whatever background check someone had run. Yes, sir. Marcus swallowed hard. Working as a janitor. The silence stretched. Crawford shifted in his seat. Blake stared at the table. The board members watched like they were witnessing something significant but weren't sure what. Why didn't you go back? Carter's voice remained steady. Finish your degree. Marcus felt the answer lodge in his throat. The truth he'd been avoiding for 13 years. Because by the time I could breathe again, it felt too late. Because I'd spent so long being invisible that I forgot I could be anything else. He forced the rest out. Because I was afraid, sir. Afraid I wasn't good enough anymore. Afraid I'd fail. Afraid my daughter would watch me fail. The silence was absolute. Blake looked uncomfortable. Crawford wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Even the board members seemed to realize they were witnessing something that transcended corporate politics. General Carter extended his hand. "Mr. Webb, I've commanded thousands of soldiers." Carter's grip was firm. Steady. The best ones, the ones who saved lives, who won battles, who made a difference, they weren't the ones with the best training or the fanciest degrees. Marcus shook his hand, too stunned to process what was happening. They were the ones who'd been broken and put themselves back together. Carter's voice carried the weight of experience. The ones who knew what it meant to lose everything and kept fighting anyway. The ones who'd experienced chaos and learned to think inside it instead of trying to control it from outside. He didn't release Marcus's hand, just held it while speaking with absolute certainty. "You're not unqualified, Mr. Webb. You're exactly qualified, because you built a system that thinks the way survivors think, the way people who've lost everything think, the way soldiers think when the plan falls apart and all you have is your judgment and your guts." Carter turned to the board. "I'm approving the contract, full funding." The board members started to relax, started to smile. Blake opened his mouth. "And I'm adding a condition." Carter's voice stopped all movement, all breath. Victoria stepped forward. "What condition General Mr. Webb leads the implementation team?" Carter spoke with finality. "Full security clearance, full compensation, full recognition. His title will be Lead Systems Architect, reporting directly to Ms. Hastings." Blake shot to his feet. "General, you can't be serious. The board has final say on personnel decisions. Then the board can find another $100 million contract." Carter's voice became steel wrapped in courtesy. "This system saves lives. Mr. Webb built it. Either he leads it or I walk, and I'll make sure every branch of the military knows why." The room erupted, board members shouting, Blake arguing, Crawford trying desperately to salvage something from the wreckage of his plans. Through it all, Marcus stood frozen. This wasn't happening. Couldn't be happening. People like him didn't get chances like this. Victoria appeared beside him. Her hand touched his arm. "Just for a moment. Breathe." Her voice was quiet beneath the chaos. "You did it. I didn't do anything." Marcus felt disconnected from his body. You showed up. You told the truth. You let them see who you really are." Victoria's eyes were bright. "That's the hardest thing anyone can do." The shouting died down. One by one, the board members fell silent. The chairwoman, an older woman Marcus had barely noticed before, stood with the authority of someone who'd learned when to let chaos run and when to impose order. "We'll vote." Her voice cut through the remaining noise. "All in favor of accepting General Carter's terms, including the appointment of Marcus Webb as lead systems architect." Hands went up. Marcus counted through a fog. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. All opposed. Blake's hand. Crawford's. One other board member who looked uncomfortable but committed. Motion carries. 9-3. The chairwoman's voice was final. "Congratulations, Mr. Webb. Welcome to Nexus Technologies, officially this time." Blake stormed out without a word. Crawford followed, defeated. The remaining board members approached to shake Marcus's hand, to welcome him, to pretend they hadn't just watched him almost get destroyed. General Carter approached one final time, the rest of the board giving him space. "Mr. Webb, I meant what I said." Carter's voice was quieter now, more human. "The best leaders I've known weren't the ones who never fell. They were the ones who got back up." He paused. "Your daughter is lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one, sir." Marcus's voice came out rough. Carter nodded. "I can tell. That's why you'll be good at this job. Because you know what matters." He turned to leave. Marcus called after him. Sir Carter looked back. "Thank you. for seeing me. Marcus felt the words inadequate, but couldn't find better ones. General Carter smiled. Transformation that made him look 10 years younger. I've spent 40 years learning that the most important people are usually the ones nobody's looking at. You reminded me why that matters. He left. The board members followed. Rachel and Maya were hugging. Helen had tears in her eyes. Victoria stood by the windows looking out at Seattle's skyline, her back to the room. You should go. Rachel appeared beside Marcus. Her voice was gentle. Sophie's at school. She deserves to hear this from you. Victoria turned from the window. Rachel's right. Go tell your daughter what happened. Marcus looked at the clock. 9:47. Sophie would be in third period. Reading, probably. She loved reading almost as much as math. I don't know how to tell her. Marcus heard the fear in his own voice. What if she's disappointed? What if she thinks less of me for hiding it all these years? Victoria walked over, stood directly in front of him. Marcus, that little girl thinks you hung the moon. Nothing you tell her is going to change that, but she deserves to know the man she already loves is even more extraordinary than she imagined. Marcus's throat closed, couldn't speak, just nodded. Rachel was already calling an Uber. It pulled up by the time Marcus reached the street. The driver asked if he was okay. Marcus realized he was crying. Didn't care. The elementary school receptionist recognized him from PTA meetings, looked concerned when he showed up at 10:15 on a Thursday morning. Mr. Webb, is everything okay? Is Sophie. Everything's fine. Marcus heard how that sounded. How desperate. How unhinged. Everything's better than fine. I just need to see her. Please. Something in his face made her smile instead of call security. Let me get Mrs. Peterson. 5 minutes later, Sophie came down the hallway holding her teacher's hand, confusion on her face, then worry when she saw her father. Daddy! What's wrong? Why are you here? Marcus knelt down in the school hallway, other kids passing by. Teachers watching. Didn't care about any of it. Nothing's wrong, Butterfly. Everything's right. Everything's finally right. Then why are you crying? Sophie touched his face with her small hand. Happy tears. Marcus pulled her close. I did it. I helped the princess remember how to smile. Sophie pulled back, studied him with those eyes that were too knowing for 8 years old. You did it. You helped her. We helped each other. Marcus wiped his eyes. And Butterfly, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Mrs. Peterson appeared in the hallway. Mid-50s kind face, the expression of a teacher who'd seen enough of life to recognize significant moments. Mr. Webb, is Sophie okay? She's perfect. Marcus stood still, holding Sophie's hand. And I'm sorry to interrupt class, but I needed to tell her something that couldn't wait, Mrs. Peterson smiled. The smile of someone who understood. Sometimes the best lessons happen outside the classroom. Sophie, why don't you take a few minutes with your dad? Come back when you're ready. They sat on a bench outside the school, morning sun warm on their faces. Sophie waited with the patience of a child who'd learned her father didn't rush important things. You know how I work nights at that big company Marcus started? How I clean the offices? Sophie nodded. You clean so things are nice for the people who work there. That's right. Marcus took a breath. But before you were born, before I met Mommy, I was studying to be a scientist. At a very good school called MIT. I was going to build computers that could help people. Sophie's eyes went wide. You were going to be a scientist, like for real, like for real. Marcus smiled despite the tears. But then Mommy got sick, and I had to make a choice. I could stay in school and finish, or I could drop out and take care of her. Take care of you. You chose Mommy? Sophie's voice was certain. I chose both of you. Marcus squeezed her hand. And I thought that meant giving up being a scientist forever. I thought I'd used up my one chance. But you didn't. Sophie spoke with the logic of someone following a story to its conclusion. The princess helped you remember. Marcus laughed through the tears. Yeah, Butterfly. Something like that. And last night the company offered me a new job. not cleaning floors. Building things, important things. They want me to be a scientist again. Sophie threw her arms around his neck. I knew it. I knew you were special. I told Molly's dad you were the smartest person in the whole world, and he didn't believe me, but I knew. When did you get so smart? Marcus held her tight. Good genes. Sophie pulled back, grinning. Mommy was smart, and you're smart, so I'm double smart. That's exactly right. Marcus felt something loosening in his chest, something that had been locked tight for 13 years. Do you know what the man in charge said today? The general? What? Sophie's eyes were wide. He said the best people aren't the ones who never fall down. They're the ones who get back up. Marcus touched her cheek. Like you and me. We fell down when Mommy died, but we got back up. Together. Sophie was quiet for a moment, then her voice came out small. Daddy, do you think Mommy knows about today? Marcus's chest seized. Yeah, Butterfly. I think she knows. And I think she's really proud of both of us. Me too. Sophie hugged him again. Can I go tell my class now? Can I tell them my dad is a scientist? You can tell them whatever you want. Marcus kissed the top of her head. Even the part about cleaning toilets. There's nothing wrong with any work that lets you take care of people you love. That's what Mrs. Peterson says too. Sophie pulled back. She kissed his cheek. To Mars and back, Daddy. To Mars and back, Butterfly. Marcus watched her run back toward the school building. Watched her stop at the door and turn around one more time, Daddy. Yeah, I'm proud of you. I was always proud of you, but now I get to tell everyone else why. The door closed behind her. Marcus sat on the bench for a long time. Sun on his face. Life changed. Future uncertain, but finally full of possibility instead of just survival. His phone buzzed. Text from Victoria. Board approved your salary. Check your email. Also take the rest of the day off. Some things are more important than work. Marcus opened the email, stared at the number. That was more than he'd made in 3 years as a janitor, more than enough to stop choosing between rent and groceries. More than enough to give Sophie the childhood she deserved. Second email from Rachel. Your office is on the 47th floor. Names already on the door. Your team starts Monday. Welcome home. Third email from Maya. Boss. Yeah. You're my boss now. How weird is that? Helen and I already have 47 questions about the temporal decay algorithm. Can we take you to lunch next week? Also, congratulations. You earned this. Marcus sat on the bench outside Sophie's elementary school, wearing a borrowed shirt and tie. Former janitor, new lead architect, single father, survivor, fighter, no longer invisible. And for the first time in 13 years, he let himself believe maybe this was just the beginning. 2 weeks later, Marcus walked through Nexus Technologies' executive floor at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, not pushing a cleaning cart, carrying a briefcase, wearing a suit that was his own, walking toward an office with his name on the door. Marcus Webb, lead systems architect. Inside, he found everything Rachel had promised. Standing desk, 3 monitors already configured to his preferences, coffee maker because Helen was right about the executive machine being terrible, and on the wall carefully taped in the center was Sophie's drawing from that morning. 2 stick figures standing on top of a tall building. One big one, small. Both smiling. Both reaching toward stars drawn in purple crayon. Caption in careful 8-year-old handwriting. Team Webb saves the universe. Marcus hung it in the center of his wall. First thing. Most important thing. The only thing that really mattered. Victoria knocked on the open door. Ready for your first day? Marcus looked at the drawing, at his daughter's handwriting. At 13 years of struggle transformed into something that meant Sophie would never have to choose between dreams and survival the way he had. Yeah, I'm ready. Nervous. Victoria leaned against the doorframe. Terrified. Marcus smiled. Does it show good? That means you care. Victoria straightened. About to leave, then paused. Marcus. Yeah, welcome home. Her voice carried warmth that had nothing to do with professional courtesy, and everything to do with two people who'd saved each other when they'd both forgotten how to save themselves. She left. Marcus sat at his desk, turned on his computer, started the work he'd been born to do. And somewhere across Seattle, Sophie Webb walked into her classroom and told everyone who would listen that her daddy was a hero. Not because he was rich or famous or powerful, because he never gave up, because he showed up every single morning, because he loved her enough to sacrifice everything and brave enough to finally take it back. That's what heroes do. They don't wait for the world to see them. They become the person they were always meant to be and let the world catch up. Marcus Webb had been invisible for 13 years, but he was never invisible to the people who mattered. And in the end, that was the only thing that counted. Not the degrees or the titles or the money, just the love given, the lives touched. The courage to show up when showing up was the hardest thing you'd ever done. Marcus had done that every single day for 13 years. And now, finally, the world could see what his daughter had known all along. Some heroes don't wear capes. Some heroes push mop buckets. Some heroes are invisible until the moment they choose not to be. And when they step into the light, they don't just change their own lives. They change what's possible for everyone who comes after.